The chalk broke between Viktor Sokolov's fingers. A small white fragment fell onto the polished classroom floor and rolled beneath the first row of desks. Nobody moved to pick it up.
To solve
32
this,
students
you
were
must
watching
work.
the 63-year-old
You must
janitor
dedicate
standing
every
in front of
waking,
3
no shortcuts
blackboards
to the
covered in
truth.
equations. So was Dr. Adrian Kessler.
The problem is yours.
Kessler stood near the teacher's desk with his arms folded, wearing a fitted navy jacket, an expensive silver watch, and the relaxed smile of a man who believed the humiliation had already succeeded.
He's not just the janitor, kids.
"You keep staring at my equations,"
He actually
said.
wrote these
A
equations.
few students laughed. Victor looked at the board. It was not basic
Look right
physics,
here at the anomaly.
not even advanced
We have to
high school
isolate the node
physics.
now.
Across
I'm trying,
3 panels,
but it's locking us
Kessler
out.
had written
Bypass
a
it.
nonlinear
Use
flight
the override
dynamics model
protocol.
for a hypersonic vehicle, complete with
This old
coupled
machine
rotational
has got
terms,
plenty of
a
life
state
left.
transition matrix, and a stability argument built around a Lyapunov candidate
You
function.
just have to treat her
the
right.
kind of mathematics that could intimidate most graduate students. Kessler picked up another piece of chalk and held it toward Victor. "So educate us." The laughter grew louder. Victor did not take the chalk. Kessler smiled, "Or admit that cleaning a classroom doesn't make you qualified to understand one." The room went quiet enough for Victor to hear the ventilation system humming above the ceiling. He looked toward the back row. A student had raised a phone. Another whispered, "This is brutal." Victor's eyes returned to the board. He had spent the morning changing 2 fluorescent tubes, repairing a leaking valve beneath the chemistry sink, and scraping gum from the underside of a library table. His gray work shirt smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. Chalk dust clung to the calluses on his right hand. Kessler stepped closer. "Well?" Victor finally accepted the chalk. He studied the equations for another 5 seconds. Then he circled one term. "Your boundary condition is wrong." Nobody laughed. Kessler's smile remained, but it became smaller. "Excuse me?" Victor drew a short line beneath the second equation. "And the linearization around your reference trajectory assumes a stability region that your own Jacobian does not preserve." A student in the front row leaned forward. Kessler's jaw tightened. Victor continued, "If you propagate this model as written, your pitch channel diverges after the 3rd correction cycle." He tapped the board. "Your aircraft does not stabilize." Kessler gave a short laugh. "You have no idea what you're talking about." A voice from the doorway answered for him. "He does." Everyone turned. Professor Nathaniel Reed stood just inside the classroom. He was 70 years old, silver-haired, thin, and still wearing the dark wool coat he had arrived in for the school's science symposium. For 3 decades, Reed had taught applied mathematics and aerospace systems at MIT. His name appeared on textbooks, research papers, government advisory panels, and lecture halls. Kessler's face changed instantly. "Professor Reed, I didn't realize you were—" Reed was not looking at him. He was staring at the janitor. At first, his expression showed confusion, then disbelief, then something close to shock. "Victor?" The chalk stopped moving in Victor's hand. Professor Reed stepped farther into the room. "Viktor Sokolov." The students looked from Reed to the janitor. Kessler's expression hardened. Victor lowered the chalk. "It has been a long time, Nathaniel." Reed stared at him. 21 years. Then his eyes moved to the equations on the board, and everything in his face changed again. Not surprise this time. Recognition. He walked to the center board. Slowly, he raised one hand toward the model Kessler had presented as his own. "Where did you get this?" The question was directed at Kessler. Kessler blinked. "It's part of my current research." "No." Reed's voice was quiet. "That isn't what I asked." He pointed to a sequence of terms near the upper right corner. "Where did you get this formulation?" Kessler hesitated. The student stopped breathing. Victor looked at the equation he had not seen publicly in more than 2 decades. There were symbols on that board that had once cost him his career. There was one correction term that only 6 people in the world had ever been supposed to see. And one of those 6 people was his daughter. To understand why a retired aerospace mathematician was holding a mop at an elite American private school, you had to go back 23 years, to a research institute outside Prague where Viktor Sokolov was considered one of the most difficult men in applied mathematics. Not because he was cruel, because he was exact. Viktor had built his career in nonlinear dynamics, adaptive guidance, and flight control theory. He specialized in systems that behaved politely on paper and violently in the real world. Aerospace engineers called them unstable. Viktor called them honest. An equation, he liked to say, did not care who had written it. If the assumptions were wrong, the equations would expose them. By his mid-40s, Viktor had become internationally respected for work in nonlinear dynamics, adaptive guidance, and robust flight control. Nathaniel Reed met him at a Zurich conference, where an argument over a Kalman filter turned into a friendship that lasted 2 decades. Viktor's wife, Anya, was a concert pianist. Their daughter, Elena, inherited both worlds, mathematics from her father and music from her mother. At 22, she entered graduate aerospace research and later joined a multinational team where Viktor served as senior advisor. The project centered on an unfinished stability framework he had developed for high-speed flight under uncertain aerodynamic loading, a model whose most dangerous weakness appeared near the edge of its stable operating region. It was difficult, elegant, and unfinished. The team called it the Sokolov envelope. Viktor hated the name. It is not an envelope, he told them. It is a warning. The model had one dangerous weakness. It depended heavily on how the reference trajectory was constrained at the boundary of the stable region. If the boundary conditions were chosen badly, the equations could appear stable while the simulated vehicle drifted into divergence. Elena discovered that weakness. She was 26. It was the best work of her life. She created a correction term that significantly improved the model and sent a preliminary version to Viktor and 3 other researchers. Then she made a mistake. Not a mathematical mistake, a procedural one. Under pressure to meet a program deadline, she incorporated a set of simulation data that had not completed the required validation process. The data came from a subcontractor. Several variables had been normalized incorrectly. The error contaminated one phase of the analysis. In ordinary academic work, the paper would have been corrected. In this program, the consequences were larger. Government funding was involved. Multiple institutions were involved. A safety review was already politically sensitive. The project leadership needed someone responsible. Elena was a doctoral researcher, young, temporary contract, easy to sacrifice. Viktor learned what was happening 2 days before the review committee met. He confronted the program director. You approved the schedule. That is irrelevant. You knew the dataset was preliminary. I knew the team was under pressure. You told them to proceed. I did not tell your daughter to certify invalid data. Viktor stared at him. The director lowered his voice. Viktor, if this falls on Elena, her career is over. And if it falls on me? The man did not answer. Viktor understood. He was senior enough to survive disgrace differently. He had tenure protections, consulting income, international contacts. Elena had none of those. So Viktor did something that would destroy almost everything between them. He signed a statement accepting responsibility for the validation decision. He wrote that he had instructed the team to proceed. It was not true. It was also not entirely simple. Viktor had created the culture of urgency. He had pushed everyone. He had demanded results. So he convinced himself the lie contained enough truth to live with. The review committee disagreed. Viktor was removed from the program. His institute suspended him. 2 partner universities ended collaborations. Funding disappeared. Rumors traveled faster than corrections ever could. The press inside the scientific community reduced the story to 1 sentence. Viktor Sokolov had compromised flight safety research. Elena was furious. Not grateful. Furious. Because nobody told her the truth. Viktor refused to explain. The program director had promised that if Viktor accepted responsibility, Elena's name would remain outside the final finding. Viktor believed telling her would risk reopening everything. He also believed something more dangerous, that one day she would understand without being told. She did not. You destroyed the project, Elena told him in their kitchen. Viktor stood near the window. I made the decision. You always make the decision. Elena, you don't trust anyone else to be right. This is not about trust. It is always about trust with you. Her hands were shaking. You taught me that the work mattered more than reputation. It does. Then why did you falsify a validation decision? Viktor had no answer he was willing to give. Elena stared at him. What happened to you? He looked away. That was the last conversation they had for almost 2 years. Then Anya became ill. Pancreatic cancer moved quickly. For 9 months, mathematics disappeared from Viktor's life. There were hospitals, medication schedules, appointments, nights sleeping in chairs. Elena came home, not for Viktor, for her mother. Anya understood what had happened between them. She asked Viktor to tell Elena the truth. He refused. Why? Because the finding is closed. That is not what I asked. She has a career. She has a father. Viktor looked at his wife. Anya shook her head. You think silence is sacrifice because silence feels difficult. He said nothing. Sometimes silence is just fear. Anya died in November. 3 months later, Elena left Europe. She abandoned aerospace research entirely. She had always been a gifted pianist, and she eventually accepted a teaching position in the United States, first at a conservatory program and later at Hawthorne Preparatory Academy, an elite private school outside Boston. She taught music theory, piano, and composition. She did not invite Viktor to visit. He came anyway, not to her apartment, not to her classroom. 3 months after Anya's death, Elena left Europe. She abandoned aerospace research and eventually built a new life in the United States as a music teacher at Hawthorne Preparatory Academy outside Boston. Viktor followed years later, not because she invited him, but because distance had become another form of silence. He rented a small apartment 40 minutes from the school and sent one message: I am here if you ever want coffee. She never answered. When Hawthorne advertised for an evening facilities technician and custodian, Viktor applied. He repaired sinks, reset breakers, moved chairs, cleaned laboratories, and never treated the work as beneath him. Elena discovered him kneeling beside a radiator during his 3rd week. What are you doing here? She asked. Repairing a valve. She stared at him. You crossed an ocean for a custodial job? Viktor said nothing. You cannot keep doing things to people and calling it sacrifice. After that, they passed each other in hallways without forcing a relationship. Then Dr. Adrian Kessler arrived, a charismatic 38-year-old applied physicist whose public lectures made him a favorite of parents and donors. Kessler's charm depended on the audience. With donors, he was polished. With people he considered beneath him, contempt leaked through small jokes. He corrected cafeteria workers in front of students, mocked scholarship students for asking for extensions, and warned maintenance staff not to touch anything expensive. He rarely shouted. He simply assumed everyone accepted his hierarchy. His first clash with Viktor came over a box of ordinary chalk. Physics is a little more precise than facilities, Kessler said. Viktor answered, then perhaps physics can order its own chalk. A student laughed. Kessler remembered it. The second clash involved Noah Park, a 17-year-old scholarship student building a flight control simulation. Kessler tore the project apart in front of the class and called the controller amateur. This is what happens when people confuse effort with competence, he said, knowing Noah could hear every word. He looked down. Kessler saw him. Something to add, Mr. Sokolov? Viktor climbed down the ladder. No. Good. After class, Noah remained at his computer. Viktor finished the ceiling panel. Then he walked past the screen. You are saturating the actuator. Noah looked up. What? Viktor pointed. There. Noah stared at the code. Viktor continued. Your controller asks for a correction the vehicle cannot physically produce. Limit the command before you tune the time step. Noah changed one value. The simulation ran. The oscillation decreased. Noah looked at Viktor. How did you know that? Viktor picked up his toolbox. I have fixed things before. Noah smiled. Within a month, 3 students had quietly begun asking Viktor questions. Not during class, after school, in hallways, near the boiler room. One asked about matrices, another about orbital mechanics. Viktor tried to stop it. Then he remembered Elena at 16. He answered. Kessler noticed. He did not like it. A teacher's authority, in Kessler's mind, depended partly on being the smartest visible person in the room. The janitor was becoming visible. Then came the symposium. Hawthorne hosted an annual science and technology event for donors, university representatives, parents, and students. Kessler was the centerpiece. That year, he announced he would present preliminary work from a new paper on adaptive stability control for high-speed atmospheric vehicles. Viktor saw the title on a poster in the hallway. He stopped walking. Adaptive boundary stabilization under uncertain aerodynamic loading. The words themselves proved nothing. Then Kessler displayed a diagram during rehearsal. Viktor felt the past open beneath him. The correction structure was familiar, too familiar. He stood at the back of the auditorium holding a mop. Kessler changed slides. There it was. Not identical, modified, renamed. But beneath the notation lived Elena's correction term, and beneath that lived Viktor's unpublished stability model. He left the auditorium before anyone noticed. That evening, Viktor called Nathaniel Reed for the first time in 14 years. Reed answered on the fourth ring. "Hello? Nathaniel." Silence. Then, "Viktor?" "Yes." Another silence. "Are you alive?" "Apparently." Reed laughed once. Then his voice changed. "Where are you?" "Massachusetts." "What?" "I need to ask you something." Viktor described Kessler's formulation. "Not the school, not Elena, just the mathematics." Reed stopped him halfway through. "Viktor, that sounds like the Prague notes." "I know." "Who has them?" 6 people had them." "Had. One is dead." Reed understood. "Anya." "Yes." "I'm sorry. It was years ago." "That doesn't change the sentence." Viktor said nothing. Reed asked, "Can you send me what you saw?" "No." "Why?" "Because I may be wrong." "You called me after 14 years because you think you're wrong?" Viktor looked toward the window of his small apartment. "I called because I hope I am." 2 days later, Hawthorne announced that Professor Nathaniel Reed would attend the symposium as a guest evaluator. Viktor did not invite him. Reed invited himself. Kessler was delighted. He had cited Reed in multiple papers. He told everyone the professor's attendance validated the seriousness of Hawthorne's program. Viktor almost admired the irony. The day of the symposium, Kessler's classroom demonstration filled beyond capacity. Students stood along the walls. Parents crowded near the back. Reed was delayed in another session. Kessler began without him. He covered the blackboards with equations. Then he noticed Viktor near the rear door carrying cleaning supplies. Kessler paused. "Mr. Sokolov." Viktor looked up. "Yes? You seem especially interested today." A few students smiled. Viktor knew the tone. "Just working." Kessler looked at the board. "No, you're staring." Noah Park shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Kessler continued. "You've developed something of a reputation around here." Viktor said nothing. "Apparently you've been tutoring my students." "I answer questions, without qualifications." Noah spoke. "He helped me fix my controller." Kessler looked at him. "I wasn't asking you." Then he turned back to Viktor. "Come here." Viktor remained still. Kessler picked up the chalk. "You like equations?" A few parents laughed. "Let's give you one." The trap was obvious. Kessler was not inviting participation. He was restoring hierarchy. Viktor walked to the front. The smell of chalk pulled him backward through 20 years. Conference halls, research rooms, Elena leaning over a notebook, Anya playing piano in the next room while he worked too late. Kessler handed him the chalk. "You keep staring at my equations." He smiled. "So educate us." The students laughed. "Or admit that cleaning a classroom doesn't make you qualified to understand one." Viktor looked at the board. Then the laughter disappeared from his awareness. He saw only structure. The model had been reparameterized, variables renamed, several terms rearranged, but mathematics carried fingerprints. Kessler had altered the surface. He had not changed the logic underneath. Viktor circled the boundary term. "Your boundary condition is wrong." Kessler's smile tightened. Viktor identified the unstable reference region, then the inconsistent Jacobian, then the correction cycle. "If you propagate this model as written, your pitch channel diverges after the third correction." Kessler laughed. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "He does." Nathaniel Reed stood in the doorway. Now the classroom was silent. Reed walked toward the board. He looked at Viktor, then the equations. "Where did you get this?" Kessler straightened. "It's part of my current research." Reed pointed to one correction term. "No, this." Kessler hesitated. "I derived it from a family of adaptive control approaches." "Which family?" "I'd be happy to discuss citations after." "Which family?" Reed's voice sharpened. Kessler looked around. "This is becoming inappropriate." Reed turned to the students. 22 years ago, Viktor Sokolov developed an unpublished nonlinear stability framework for high-speed flight under uncertain aerodynamic loading. Whispers moved through the room. Kessler interrupted. "That name is familiar, but it should be." Reed pointed at the janitor. "You're standing beside him." Every face turned toward Viktor. Noah whispered. What? Reed continued. The formulation on this board contains a correction structure that appeared in internal research notes distributed to a very small group. Kessler's face lost color. That's impossible. Viktor finally looked at him. Why? Kessler opened his mouth. Nothing came. Reed studied the board again. This notation is different. He nodded slowly. But the sequence is not. Then he pointed to a peculiar nested term. Especially this. Viktor knew exactly what Reed had seen. Elena's correction. Kessler stepped toward the board. I can explain. A voice came from the back of the room. Then explain it. Elena Sokolov stood near the doorway. She had arrived during Reed's explanation. Her face was pale. Viktor froze. Elena looked at the equation, then at her father. She recognized it too. She had not worked in aerospace for nearly 15 years. But some things live deeper than memory. Kessler recovered first. Miss Sokolov, this is an academic matter. Elena's eyes did not leave the board. That term. Kessler said nothing. I wrote that term. Now even Reed looked at her. Elena stepped forward. At 26, her voice shook. I spent 4 months trying to stabilize the boundary transition. Viktor lowered his eyes. Elena pointed. That coefficient arrangement was in my doctoral notes. Kessler's face tightened. Similar structures can emerge independently. Yes. Elena nodded. Then derive it. The room went still. Kessler stared at her. Elena repeated, derive it. No answer. Professor Reed stepped back from the board. I would also like to see that. Kessler tried another path. This is not a peer review environment. No, Reed said. It is worse. Kessler looked at him. You presented unpublished technical work to students and donors as your own. Reed's face was cold. You should be able to explain every line. Kessler did not. The symposium ended early. Hawthorne's headmaster secured Kessler's presentation files and called outside counsel. Because versions of the work had already entered journal submissions and a grant proposal, the school commissioned an external academic integrity review. Investigators traced the old mathematics to a restricted European archive created after the Prague project collapsed. Access logs showed that Kessler's doctoral advisor had once been granted temporary access, and later emails established that Kessler himself had reviewed scanned internal notes during graduate school. He had changed notation, expanded portions of the framework, and cited Viktor's public papers, but never disclosed the restricted source. Elena's correction term was especially difficult to explain as independent work. Hawthorne placed him on leave. Students began searching Viktor's name and found the old scandal that had ended his career. Noah showed Viktor the archived headline. Is this why you stopped? He asked. Viktor looked across the classroom at Elena. Yes. She heard him and walked away. That evening she appeared at Viktor's apartment. It was the first time she had ever been there. He opened the door. She did not come inside. Did you know Kessler had my work? No. Did you know Reed was coming? Yes. You called him? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I was not certain. Elena laughed bitterly. You are never uncertain. Viktor accepted the blow. She looked at him. 23 years and you still do this. What? You decide what everyone else is allowed to know. Viktor's throat tightened. Elena. No. She stepped closer. You destroyed your career. You let me believe you compromised that project. You let me believe every accusation. Viktor said nothing. Her voice lowered. Was it you? He looked at her. She had finally asked the question. Anya had begged him to answer. No. Elena stopped breathing. Viktor continued. The preliminary data set was incorporated under schedule pressure. You were responsible for the analysis. Her eyes filled. But you did not authorize the schedule. Elena stared at him. The director did. Yes. And you signed the statement. Yes. Why? Viktor looked down. Because they were going to name you. Elena shook her head. No. You were temporary staff. They needed someone. No. They offered to keep your name out if I accepted the validation decision. Elena backed away as if he had struck her. You lied to me. Yes. For 23 years. Yes. Her eyes were wet now. You thought that protected me. I thought it preserved your career. I left the field. Viktor could not answer. I left because I thought the work had become rotten. Her voice broke. I thought you had become rotten. Viktor looked at the floor. Elena whispered. Mom knew. Yes. She told you to tell me. Yes. And you didn't. No. Elena wiped her face. For a long time neither moved. Then she said the sentence that hurt more than anything Kessler had said. "You saved my reputation and lost me anyway." Viktor nodded. "Yes." Elena walked away. He did not follow. The formal review lasted 4 months. 2 journals withdrew Kessler's submissions. His grant proposal was suspended, and former students produced additional evidence of unattributed code and removed co-author credit. Hawthorne ultimately terminated him for academic misconduct and professional misrepresentation. His outside research affiliation ended, speaking invitations disappeared, and the reputation he had built around intellectual superiority collapsed under the documentation. The first Monday after Kessler's termination, he changed air filters in the library. Students stared. A few asked for photographs. He refused. One called him Professor Sokolov. Viktor said, "Mr. Sokolov is sufficient." The headmaster called him into the office. "We would like to offer you a faculty position." Viktor almost laughed. "I have no current teaching license. We can arrange a visiting scholar title." "No." The headmaster blinked. "You don't want to teach?" "I did not say that." "Then what are you saying?" Viktor looked through the office window toward the maintenance courtyard. "I am saying I already have a job." The headmaster leaned back. "Students are lining up outside the boiler room to ask you mathematics questions." "That is inconvenient." The headmaster smiled. "So help me solve it." They reached a compromise. Viktor remained on the facilities staff. 2 afternoons a week, after his shift, he volunteered in an applied mathematics workshop open to any student. No honors requirement, no recommendation, no test score. Anyone could come. Noah Park was always first. The workshop began with 12 students. By winter, it had 43. Viktor taught them the same thing he had once told researchers. Equations do not care about status. Assumptions fail whether a janitor makes them or a professor does. Evidence does not become more correct because it comes from an expensive office. And intelligence without humility is only another unstable system. Elena did not attend the first workshop, or the second. Then one afternoon, Viktor entered the music hall to repair a loose pedal on a grand piano. Elena was practicing alone. She stopped when she saw him. He held up the toolbox. "Work order." She nodded. He knelt beside the piano. For several minutes the only sound was metal against wood. Then Elena said, "Professor Reed emailed me." Viktor kept working. "What did he say?" "He had records." Viktor stopped. Elena continued. "Old correspondence, meeting notes, a letter you wrote after the review." Viktor closed his eyes. "Nathaniel, of course. He said you asked the committee not to discipline any junior researcher." "Yes." "He said you threatened to withdraw from every partner institution if they named me." Viktor looked at the piano pedal. "Yes." Elena's voice softened. "You were impossible." "So I have been told." For the first time, she almost smiled. Then the smile disappeared. "I'm still angry." "You should be." "I don't forgive you for not telling me." "I know, but I understand why you did it." Viktor looked up. Elena's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "That is not forgiveness." "No, it's a beginning." Viktor nodded. "A beginning is enough." She looked toward the keyboard. "Do you remember Mom's Rachmaninoff?" "Yes. I'm performing it at the spring concert." Viktor waited. Elena took a breath. "You can come." His face did not change much. It never did. But his hand tightened around the wrench. "I would like that." 3 months later, the Hawthorne auditorium was full. Not for Viktor, for Elena. She walked onto the stage in a black dress and sat at the grand piano beneath a single warm light. Viktor sat in the last row. He had arrived directly from work. His gray facilities shirt was clean, but he still wore the same dark work pants and heavy shoes. Professor Reed sat beside him. "You could have worn a jacket," Reed whispered. Viktor looked at him. "You could have stayed in Cambridge." Reed smiled. "Still charming." Elena placed her hands on the keys. The first notes filled the hall. For several minutes Viktor did not think about Kessler, or Prague, or lost papers, or academic titles. He thought about Anya playing in their apartment while Elena did homework at the kitchen table. He thought about 23 years of silence. He thought about how easily a person could confuse suffering with virtue. When the piece ended, the audience stood. Viktor remained seated for 1 second longer than everyone else. Then he stood too. Elena looked toward the back row. She found him, and nodded. It was small, almost invisible. For Viktor, it was enough. Years later, students still remembered the afternoon when a janitor in a gray work shirt corrected an equation Before an MIT professor confirmed he was right, Viktor wanted them to remember something simpler than his hidden resume. Mathematics had answered before status did. Kessler believed credentials determined who was allowed to speak, and he assumed a man carrying a mop could be humiliated safely because everyone would accept that hierarchy. But the model was unstable, the attribution was false, and the evidence did not care who held the chalk. Viktor never returned to aerospace research full-time. He published one final paper with Elena and Nathaniel Reed, revisiting the stability model and correcting the boundary formulation that had begun everything. Elena's name appeared first. The dedication read, "For Anya, who understood stability better than either of us." Then Viktor returned to Hawthorne. He repaired doors, changed filters, and answered questions after school. He refused to put his name above the workshop because he no longer needed another title. When students apologized for asking something they thought was stupid, he gave them one answer: ask. He had learned that ignorance was not the most dangerous thing in a room. Fear of admitting ignorance was. And the most dangerous expert was not someone capable of being wrong, but someone convinced that status made being wrong impossible. Adrian Kessler had used intelligence to decide who deserved dignity. Viktor Sokolov had lost a career and almost lost his daughter before understanding that dignity had never depended on intelligence at all. He preferred the gray work shirt, the keys at his belt, and chalk dust on his fingers. Sometimes the man holding the mop understands the equation better than the man teaching it. And sometimes a lie built over 20 years collapses after one quiet sentence. Your boundary condition is wrong.